Welcome everybody to Monday Night Live. My name's Arden and I'm delighted to have our guests on live, and I'm delighted that you're watching this on YouTube and listening to it on the Negotiators podcast. Tonight we're going to talk about cultural negotiations. It's very interesting that people don't always put themselves in the shoes of other people, and yet we have all these cultures both within countries and externally. Eva's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She comes from Estonia. She studied on the east coast of America and now lives in New Mexico. I nearly said that was on the west coast. That shows my geography is not that good, Eva. She's a real estate broker, director of training for Coldwell Baker Legacy, teaches negotiation skills, which has different jargon, different words to what we might use here in the UK and what Europeans might use as well. So welcome, Eva. Thanks for joining us. And when we were rehearsing this, you did tell me that to be a real estate broker, it takes 10 weeks of training. I'm not sure it takes any training here in the UK. If you turn up, you've got the job. I'm not sure that's absolutely correct, and I expect someone will correct me on that. Eva, just tell us a little bit about your background before we get into negotiating in Albuquerque.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you again, Derek, for having me. I am Eva Fanari, as Derek said. I am originally from Estonia. I was born and raised there, and then when I was 25, I got a scholarship to Savannah, Georgia, and then I met a boy. Here I am 15 years later, still in the United States. But absolutely, you are right, Derek. I am a real estate broker. And in the United States, every state runs their real estate transactions a little bit differently. And in the state of New Mexico, you have to have pre-licensing education before you, and then you have to pass the state test, and there's a national test as well. Then you get your license. But the pre-licensing school is predominantly about the national and state laws around real estate, because real estate exchanges hands a lot here. For example, in Estonia, when people actually buy a house, it's for life. They don't plan on moving from that house anytime soon unless they absolutely have to. But in the United States, prior to 2008, people would move house every 5 to 6 years. And after the 2008 recession, it's closer to 8 years. So every 8 years, an average American family changes house, either downsizing, upsizing, moving to a different state. So they're very mobile when it comes to homes.
Do those statistics include people that are renting, or is that actually when they're buying with a mortgage?
This is actually for people when they are buying a house with a mortgage. Most of the population will obtain some sort of financing to buy a house. But yes, owning a home where you can lay your head to rest is a really important and big part of the American dream. It's sort of almost expected that this is what you thrive for as soon as you become an adult.
Great. And well, it'd be interesting to find out what happens in Europe from Gregor, who's on the call, but certainly that's the case here in the UK. But of course, in Germany, it certainly isn't the case, which is interesting. Now, you've got some slides for us in the way that you teach negotiation skills, which is slightly different to the way I teach it. So I'm really looking forward to this. So if they're there and they're working, let's go for it.
Yes, so before I put the slides up, just to let everybody know what I do. So after people go through the pre-licensing school and they actually get the license, that doesn't really mean that they are ready to actually do the business itself, because the pre-licensing school does not prepare the real estate brokers for how to get business, what the psychology of sales are, what's the psychology of persuasion and influence, and also, of course, the myriad of paperwork and contracts that come with it in the state of New Mexico. And even though in many other states, lawyers are usually involved in a transaction when real estate exchanges hands, but in the state of New Mexico, lawyers are completely out of it. So our purchase agreement alone is 20 pages long. So that's what we handle here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting. I would have just thought there was a lawyer involved.
Yes, no, not in this state, but there is a lawyer involved in many other states. All right, let's get to the slides then. Okay, so what I teach essentially are the 4 levels of negotiation. And let's take a look what these 4 levels are, and I'll very briefly tell you what those levels are. And when I say 4 levels of negotiation, what I mean here is there are essentially 4 levels where all people fall under when it comes to communicating, negotiating, conflict resolution, and also emotional self-regulation, because it's something that nobody teaches you in a grade school, not in Estonia and not in the United States. Perhaps in UK, you are luckier that this is part of the curriculum, but not here. And it's one of the most important parts of negotiation and communicating. So let's start off. Level 1, let's call those instigators. And instigators are people who run with really high drama. They are critical, they gossip a lot, they blame. It's very difficult to see their role. It's difficult for them to see their own role in a conflict or a mistake, so they don't usually own up to any mistakes or conflicts, and they tend to see the worst in people. This is a small percentage in the population, but we all know at least one of those, right? And sometimes we can be that person as well. Like, I'll give you an example. When my father passed away 4 years ago, I think I was a really negative person. I held on to a lot of anger that I had to work through. So I'm pretty sure to other people around me, that's how I came across. A level up from those instigators would be our reactionaries. That's the level 2, and that's where the majority of the population lives in on a daily basis. These people have learned to control their own emotions enough so that they don't really bring the drama to the table, but they get easily triggered. They are happy to live their lives unless somebody upsets them. So therefore, these folks tend to live their lives reacting to everyday minutia around them. And the question, of course, always is, what are their triggers? And let me tell you, those are almost impossible to predict. Then we get to the next level up, and that's level 3. Let's call those bystanders. Those people have done enough personal development work that they have learned to control their own emotions, and they are really well aware of what their personal triggers are, so they know to look out for those. And therefore, they don't bring any drama to the table. And also, they don't react to every tiny little thing around them. Now, this level may be really great for a Christmas dinner with family. You just stay out of it. Those are our people. They just stand by. They don't engage in conflict. Neither do they bring conflict to the table. And even though it may be okay for a family dinner at Christmas, on a professional level, when you represent clients, when you represent someone else's money and a lot of money, when you represent your personal business, it may not be enough. And usually it isn't enough. For the longest time, for several years there, I thought that that's the way to run a business. And it still creates a lot of internal turmoil if that's where you stop at. So let's go and take a look at what's the highest level of negotiators and communicators. That's our level 4, and those are our de-escalators. These people don't bring the drama, they don't react, and they don't just disengage if things or if the communication or situation is getting tense. They will actually actively engage to de-escalate the instigators and reactionaries, and they will also take proactive steps to calm down the internal turmoil of the bystanders. So in a short sentence, what they do is they proactively de-escalate the situation. They have a trained eye to recognize the signs of distress and triggers in other people. So that's essentially what you want to thrive for. And that's what I teach as part of my curriculum, because I teach when I get the freshly licensed real estate brokers to my class, and I spend another 90 hours with them. And those 4 levels are heavily embedded into my training.
So tell me, where did you get those titles from? Because I haven't seen them in any books. They're not from Harvard. They're interesting, but I was curious about that.
Yes. So Derek, I came up with those ones. This is how I explain it to my brokers so that they would really understand it in the layman's way. These are options, and the question is always, where are you at? It's easy to take a look at other people and place them on different levels, but the biggest work for us, for everybody, is to master our own emotions and have a critical eye for ourselves. Not critical that you have to say negative things to yourself, but the feed forward direct to ourselves from ourselves is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and very difficult to do, to be in that de-escalator box. It needs a lot of training,
Yes.
a lot of practice, and a big awareness of our own personal feelings and situations in all areas.
Absolutely, Derek. We make decisions with emotions. This was the greatest shock for me when I got into this business 10 years ago. I read these books, the modern theory about negotiating tries to make the negotiation and human communication something that we can easily predict, and we can have a formula for it. Near impossible. And when you have involved when in a transaction, let me tell you this, Derek. Usually when people start moving a house, it's because they have something very significant happening in their lives at that time.
Okay.
Moving house is so stressful that most people don't do it unless there is something that is pressing them to do so. For example, a death, a divorce, birth of a child, a marriage. And of course, some of those are really positive changes, but even a positive change, such as a birth of a child, can be highly stressful, right? And now the real estate brokers enter this world during this extreme stress in people's lives. And on top of that, they have to start moving house. For the most part, it is very hard for our clients to fully control their emotions. And we see this every day, how emotional this business is. Your regular residential resale does not take place because of some rational decision making. It's all driven by emotions. And when we handle people's largest investments of their lives, the largest purchase that most of people will ever make, now the tension is really high, and we deal with a lot of emotions. I would say that 75% of my salary when I work on a transaction comes from the psychologist/psychiatrist work that I do.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I don't think estate agents in this country have any training on these skills. They just want to close the sale. But of course, they generally are only handling one side of the transaction. But we'll see what.
Yes, and here it's the same way, that a lot of brokers don't have the skills. And just to throw some numbers at you, Derek, and everybody here, 87% of real estate brokers in the United States get out of business annually.
Wow, 87%.
87% turnover rate in this business. And it is because of a high burnout rate, because of the emotional stress that comes with this business.
So you're
saying,
saying,
it was shocking.
You're saying the average life of a real estate broker is 1.5 years then, roughly.
Pretty much. That's exactly what it is.
After 10 weeks of training.
After doing the pre-licensing, and then Coldwell Baker Legacy in New Mexico requires all new brokers go through the training that I am in charge of. But a lot of brokers just don't have the resources to put something like this together. And I think that definitely contributes. But
okay, well, I may be preempting something, but how much is the average transaction fee that you take for doing a deal?
for one side on a transaction, it depends. Now that depends. And
that sounds like a negotiator's answer, Eva, if you don't mind me saying.
Yes, it is. And I just in the back of my head, Derek, I'm hearing a bell going off because this is recorded. And if I would tell you some numbers, then that can be construed as price fixing what I'm about to say here.
No,
so I'm going to leave this aside, but I can text you later. I can talk to you personally about my personal numbers.
No, that's something that I do understand, because when I've been to the speaking conference in the States, no one is allowed to talk about the fees or the prices they might charge. And that's been explained to me. Whereas in the UK, of course, it's free to ask, and people would tell you if they felt comfortable. Over here at the moment, the average fee is 1%. But it really depends on whether it's in London, outside London, things like that. I'm legally allowed to tell you that from over here, aren't I? Or do I need to edit that out?
Well, let me just put it this way, Derek, that it's significantly higher over here.
Okay, I guessed it.
And I think that's why a lot of people are attracted to this business without really realizing what the challenges might be and how unprepared they actually can be for this business, because I was Derek unprepared. And by the end of the first year, I realized that either I'm going to burn or I have to learn. It's either burn or learn. And I had to stress that came with this job would have just killed me. And I'm not really exaggerating here.
No, I get that. Okay. Shall we keep going?
Yes, please.
Yep. Very good so far. Thank you, Eva, for being honest with us.
Yes. So next up, I was going to share, or you are going to learn 2 tips from me here that will help you get to become a de-escalator. I will not be really telling you how you can manipulate others or influence others. I think that the best way to become a de-escalator is to start working on yourself. Because if you change yourself and you change your energy and how you go about things, then the other people have no other choices but either A, to leave, or B, to change as well. That's my advice here. But tip 1, and I know that those tips sort of sound something you have come across, but let me explain specifically what I mean here. First tip is twofold. You have to accept the fact that people are unpredictable and unreadable at all times. That's who they are. And let me explain a little bit. Why do I even say this? Because a lot of the modern science or sort of theory of negotiation will try to convince you otherwise, that there is a way to, with 100% certainty, control and predict and read people. Here's why it's difficult. When we mostly talk about communication, then we mostly focus on the 3 elements of communication. And I know for a fact that this group here is very familiar with all of those. Those are your words, what we say, tone of voice, how we say it, and then body language as well. And those are really important elements of communication because they give us a ton of information. Here's where the challenge comes in. We can find out by the words, tone of voice, or body language if somebody is distressed or triggered by something. But it is near impossible to figure out what specifically is causing distress or what is a specific trigger. And here's why. So that to communication, there are 4 additional elements that oftentimes it is difficult for us to even know. And here are the other 4 elements. So really there's 7 elements of communication. Here are our top 3, which we can easily see. If I had drawn here an iceberg, this would be the tip of the iceberg. Let's take a look what's happening below the waterline. In any situation where people are exchanging information or emotions or whatnot, we also have internal dialogue happening at the same time. If you had a disagreement with your spouse before going to work in the morning, that dialogue may still be running around somewhere in the background, and it is affecting your tone of voice or the choice words that you are choosing in that given moment. And it can also affect the body language. Then also emotional experience. What has been your emotional experience, or what is your emotional experience right then and there? Then we have body experience, and this is a really specific one here that I hear the most from when I discuss the elements of communication with my audiences. Women oftentimes say that people think that they are upset at something, or they don't like something, they disagree with something, because they are holding their hands across the chest and legs across, when in reality, they're just cold.
Yep.
Oftentimes we misread the body language, thinking that something is going on in the person's head or mind or thought process, whilst it's actually a physical bodily experience that you are seeing. Mm-hmm. And then we have the seventh one, which is just delightful to me. And it is personal, psychological, social, mystical, and cultural conditioning. I'll give you a quick example about it. And I am from Estonia, and it is sort of a given understanding in the business world that it is not okay for women to go to work with shoes where you can see the toes.
Huh, really? Wow.
Because it's a toe or a foot or an exposed female foot is too intimate, too exposed to everybody. In the United States, I live in New Mexico. It's 105 degrees here today. Most women for 8 months out of a year wear some sort of sandals. And I have to pay attention to myself, because just for a little bit there, when I see somebody's toes in a professional setting, it makes me take a step back. I feel like I have been exposed to too much information. Now, this is a cultural conditioning that is running in my background. And those are small, seemingly insignificant, but they can influence our tone of voice, our body language, and the words we choose to use. If that makes sense at all.
That makes total sense. The bits that's puzzling me and puzzling some of our guests is, how can you read that and understand it? Because we know there's something going on. Yeah, they folded their arms, and of course it could be cold, they could have a headache. But what are you going to do with this vague information that you might have?
Yes, this is the $1 million question, Derek, because we would love to know, and there are branches in universities across the world who are trying to figure out how to accurately read those cues. The best way to go about it is to ask questions, but you have to be very delicate to ask those questions. And I think that what Derek, you have said many, many times throughout your seminars here or your workshops on Monday nights, is that we can't assume anything, assume nothing. Ask a question and see where that question takes you. An open-ended question is the best.
No, absolutely.
But when I see any signs of distress or triggers, I know to proceed with caution, and I create space. You have to create space and not rush things, so that the other person can feel that the pressure on them is not as heavy as they might feel otherwise. The best advice I can give to my new brokers is, you need to slow down. We like to rush things. And again, now we come back to our psychological and social conditioning. How fast do you like to move? I know for me, I want things done yesterday, and I really need to keep it in the back of my head. I need to slow down. I need to allow sometimes days, if the contract allows me, if we have that time, I need to slow things down. If I don't have actual hours to give to the situation, then oftentimes what helps is if you just start speaking more slowly.
And you speak quickly.
I am a fast speaker. I hope I have done you proud today, Derek. I tried to slow down a bit.
Actually, for the others on here, Eva talks really quickly, a bit like a New Yorker, in my opinion. And I said to her, perhaps you need to slow down for Brits, because Brits are generally slower speakers than New Yorkers. But we'll bring Tim in on that a bit later on from Texas. Okay, that's great. Very interesting. And I had a client actually that in a meeting was a good client, and he had his arms folded the whole time, and we thought, we're not going to get this deal. This is a total nightmare. When we spoke to him afterwards in rapport, he said, I just had a D appraisal from my boss and I was so cross about it that I couldn't keep it off my mind. And we thought we'd upset him, done something wrong. So that really does emphasize your point, and it emphasized it to me big time.
Yes, Derek, and I think I don't have a research to show it, but I have a feeling that women may be more prone to internalizing those cues. Something is off, it must be me. I pick up easily when people are distressed, and oftentimes I make it about me. It's not about me.
Yeah, I mean,
very little matters in this world are about me. I've found it out during my midlife years. But no, other people.
I don't think you've got there yet to your midlife years, but anyway, never mind.
Well, in Estonia, average life expectancy, yeah, I'm right in the middle.
Okay.
So, but it is, Derek, nobody wakes up in the morning conniving, or maybe some people, but the vast majority do not wake up in the morning conniving, cunning plans to hurt your feelings. Just doesn't. We are so absorbed with our own realities and our own everyday little idiosyncrasies. We don't pay that much attention to other people.
Well, the two things you're talking about there before you move on is number one, the imposter syndrome, which according to the research from Amy Cuddy, and I'm a great fan of Amy Cuddy, despite the criticism she gets, which I think is probably a bit unfounded because it all makes common sense to me, and there's nothing like common sense. And also raising people's emotional intelligence. Now, do you think you can raise people's emotional intelligence? I think you can, but if it's low in the first place, how much can you raise it?
I think you can raise people's emotional intelligence. I think this is what I have learned, Derek, to be where I am right now, to be the director of this just amazing company in New Mexico. I've had to become somebody else. The challenge here is that no employer, no spouse, no wife, no husband, no grandparents, no neighbors have the time and energy to do it for you. So this is the work everybody has to do for themselves. And I say this over and over. Your greatest work in this life is not your book, not your podcast, your product or service or business. Your greatest work in this life is you. And every day you need to focus on working on the parts of you that you wish to see were different. And that work lies on you. Sometimes it can take decades to reprogram your mind. And it of course starts with taking an accurate count of what you already have and what you don't have. And Derek, you have spoken about the blind spots that we have about ourselves. You have to get honest with yourself, because that's the only way forward.
Absolutely. We've all got blind spots, and the more you can close your blind spots down, the more effective it is. And if you want to look, anyone wants to look at that watching this, the model's called Johari's Window, Johari, and that's from somebody called Joe and Harry, who put this model together. It's a very effective model, and it's actually on page 107 of Marshall Goldsmith's book, because I've been coaching somebody on it this morning. Eva, we better keep going because yes. Time is ticking.
Okay, I have one more tip for you. I had two tips for you. One was people are unpredictable and unreadable. Just accept the fact. And then the tip number two is pause. And when I say pause here, I don't really mean that you need to take a break from things or leave from one room to another room. But every time when you are interacting with another human, right before you start to speak, there is a pause somewhere in your head. You're thinking about, this is what I'm going to say, and then you're about to open your mouth and say, and there's this tiny little pause. I invite you to catch yourself during that pause and drag it out. If you stop talking, the majority of people will feel the need to fill the space, and that's when you get to the bottom of things. I just had this experience with a colleague last Friday, and again, I sensed that something was up with her, something had stressed her. And when I asked, how's her day going? She said, oh yeah, it's going really well. And I was about to confirm her feelings. I caught myself in that moment, and I stood there and I nodded my head until it got uncomfortable enough. And then she told me that she had had a significant incident in her private life with her family that was just going in the background.
Wow, that's a fantastic tip. And I think a lot of us don't pause enough. We don't pause when we're speaking, presenting, and we don't pause before we want to say anything. So that's great. So that's the last slide. Thank you. Before we go open it up for questions, I want to ask you about what's going on in Europe. I know your mum and dad are in Estonia. You did tell me that the Estonians have been telling the Finns that what's happening could have happened in the last 20 years. Can you just explain a bit more of that?
Yes, the intel from Eastern Europe has been talking about aggression coming from Russia for the last 20 years solid. And it's difficult for the West to really understand it. So Estonians and I know Ukrainians have done a lot of intel, especially over the last year or so, that the Russians are planning on something more unusual, more aggressive than usual. And it hasn't been welcomed necessarily in the West. And of course, you know, what do the Eastern Europeans really know? But the Finns, I remember right after February 24th, when Russia started the hot military action in Ukraine, there was a newspaper article sort of calling out the Finnish government and security agencies to sort of let down their previous biases about the intel that's coming out of Eastern Europe and take it more seriously. So, and now Finland is on the track to become a member of NATO.
And of course, they're joining at quite a late stage. And
yes, they are. They always took pride in the fact that they were the neutral party. But Finns know very well how unpredictable their eastern neighbor can be because of the Winter War that started in 1941. Yes.
And I think the border between Russia and Finland is about 400 kilometers, isn't it? If not even further. So it's pretty undefensible for people to walk in. Okay, Eva, that's fantastic. I got one question to finish with from Alex that I'd like to ask you, and then we'll stop the recording. We'll come back for your last tip. We talked about your 4 levels, and negotiators have one of the 4 levels that they tend towards. However, from a tactical point of view, and depending on the negotiation, can it be advantageous to play a different role? You're pausing.
Yes, I think so.
You're pausing.
You're
doing that pause
really
on me now. Yeah, brilliantly. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yes, you did. I had to think about this for a moment. Yes, once in a while, I think purposefully you could be a representative of one of the lower levels, either 3, 2, or 1. And I do believe that it's difficult to, as I said, it's difficult to predict how a negotiation situation is actually going to take place in real life. So therefore, you have to have your toolbox full and at the drop of the hat, pull out whatever you need at the time. But I can absolutely see that sometimes you need to be the reactionary. You need to show negative reaction to almost teach a lesson to the other side, because otherwise they don't think that it is serious enough. You are serious enough about this. Absolutely.
I was thinking about 3 negotiation tactics that I use and teach my clients. One is flinching, looking absolutely outraged at that offer. Number 2 is the Columbo tactic, the dumb is smart one. I really don't understand what's going on here. I'm a bit thick and all the rest of it. Not to be overdone, but yeah, just moving around those tactics and understanding them. The issue is, if you're with someone, and you should always have an observer and someone to give you moral support in an important negotiation that meets the 80-20 rule criteria, they've got to be totally briefed that what you're doing, because I've been in some circumstances where the person didn't know what I was up to and thought I really was dumb and didn't understand, and then started explaining it to me, which was a nightmare, of course, because they were giving the game away to the other side. But yeah.
But yes, but that's part of being a de-escalator, knowing when to pull those tools out. And the difference between a reactionary and a de-escalator is that the de-escalator doesn't get emotionally involved. He or she understands that it is nothing but a tool that I'm using here, but the reactionary will lose sleep over this.
No, absolutely. And I find more and more that whilst people say they're good negotiators and they don't need any help on negotiating, when it actually comes down to it, they do negotiate rather pathetically on their own account or for their company. But
yes, Derek, one of the greatest worries for real estate brokers is that when their clients come in contact with one another, so the buyers of a house meet with the sellers of the house, and even worse if the other broker is there as well, because they're going to say something that is going to hurt them. And oftentimes when they have the maybe misconception that they're great negotiators, it's even harder for them to now deal with those consequences.
I like to say to people, you're a really slick negotiator, and they kind of let their guard down at that point. It's so crazy, isn't it, sometimes? But Eva, one last tip in the emotional, psychological arena.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think my tip is that you need to work on yourself every single day. Practice. Every single moment of your life is essentially a negotiation. Maybe you're negotiating a bedtime with somebody, such as myself. Maybe you are negotiating a daily allowance. Maybe you're negotiating millions of dollars. And even when you wake up in the morning, your alarm clock, you're starting to negotiate with yourself now. Are you going to press a snooze button? Is it 5 minutes? Are you going to get up right then and there? And you have to practice. If you don't have a place to practice, go to the airports. Oh my, what's happening in the airports right now? I was putting my mom on an airplane yesterday, and just to see just the conflict where she's coming from, and those cultural conditioning, and how she's talking to somebody who is from South America, how differently they see everything and what's a trigger point for each of them. It was just fascinating. But yes, use everything as a negotiation and you'll get really good and confident.
Eva Fanari, thanks for joining Monday Night Live. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on again. You're a regular. I hope you'll come back and join us and talk about some more cultural issues. Good luck with your professional speaking career, because I know that you're an important member of the Professional Speaking Association, National Speaking Association, as it's called in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And can we have the usual round of applause from Monday Night Live for Eva?
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, again, and thank you everybody for taking your time being here.
Brilliant, and thank you for joining us from 5,000 miles away.